Let's just wait for the YouTube to load. Okay, good to go. Can you see the screen?
Yes, very good.
Okay, good. So the waters in the Bible are not a physical substance, what we call water today, but something primordial, this kind of proto-elements from which the world has been formed. And also, if you look at this, sometimes people say it's like kind of reference to the idea that the life on earth was born out of water, and that we as human beings start our life in the waters in the mother's womb. We are completely wrapped in the water bubble, so to speak, and that's what this archaic image of the world is, and that hopefully helps us to understand what the psalm means, but by God that spread the world as a tent. So God has made this world as if He has put a tent, and that was an image probably very familiar to a nomadic culture like early Israelite culture. Then again, this phrase that God covers His chambers with waters and makes clouds His chariot. So again, God would inhabit the world above waters and would sometimes descend with His presence to the world below. That's what this psalm is trying to say. And all this imagery about God walking on the clouds or riding His chariot in the sky and walking on the wings of the wind, this beautiful image of wind as a kind of highway on which God makes His march through the sky, are pretty memorable and powerful. One literary feature that deserves attention here is this the use of something they call active participles. So like doing, making, singing, these are active participles in English, but in old ancient Hebrew and also in ancient Greek, they were even more powerful because participle is a word that brings together three things: action, an action that becomes a quality of a person, and a person itself. So it's always, there is a doer, there is an action, an actor, an action, and this actor and action are so closely bound together that the action becomes like a defining characteristic of the person. So like, say in English, painter. So painter is a person who paints. And literary, if we put it literary, it would be something like the one who is, sorry, it's a mistake, who is clothing himself with light. God is the one who is robing himself, the one who is spreading the tent, the one who is covering. And that's not a phrase, but it's one word in Hebrew and in Greek, this active participle. And why it's important? Because if we go through these verses and the following ones, we see that all these long phrases here, they are like just characteristics of God. you have clothed yourself with praise is just one short word in Hebrew and in Greek. And it kind of makes God uniquely present in this action. It's not like God just does something. No, it's God who is totally invested in the action that he does in the world and for the world. I don't know if it's clear because it's a bit tricky, I understand, but generally why it's important, because it conveys the idea that God reveals himself not somewhere beyond the world, above the world, but in the creation, by clothing himself in the light, by establishing the earth on the waters, by walking on the clouds. God is presented as someone actively and manifestly present in the world, in the creation, in natural phenomena. And that's one of the strongest and most distinct features of this psalm, that God and nature are so closely interconnected that sometimes we cannot see the difference between the two. And we will see this signs of confusion almost a bit later. Another thing I wanted to comment is this verse that is pretty confusing. God who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flaming fire. It reads as if there were angels, just they exist and they are made by God into spirits, or God has his ministers who are made into flaming fire, somehow transformed into flaming fire. But the problem with this verse is that it could be read in two directions, because there are some translations that actually read it completely differently. He makes the winds his messengers, flaming fire his ministers. And well, spirits and winds are the same word. Because in Hebrew original and also in Greek, these are basically the same word. And messenger, angel is a Greek word for messenger. So here angels are made spirits, and you can read it also differently. So the winds are made messengers. And it's an obscure verse, and it's interesting because it kind of brings us to the idea that it's natural phenomena that are serving God. It's just a kind of poetic language in which wind or blazing fire becomes like God's tools by which he orders the world or does something in the world? Or is it about heavenly powers, angels, that are represented in the world through metaphoric images of wind and fire? And in the tradition of the church, especially in the Byzantine tradition, this reading was favored more, namely that this natural phenomena like wind or thunder, the lightning, yeah, they are natural. They are part of this world, but they kind of mirror something from the other world. They mirror greater powers that stand behind them and that eventually come down to some heavenly powers that are called angels in theological language. Also, this idea of wind as an instrument for creation again goes back to just the second verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:2, the Spirit of God or the wind of God hovering over the deep or the abyss at the creation. So this tradition to use wind as an image of God's creative power goes back to again to Genesis story of creation. In any case,
I have a question
yeah.
because you're on this. So the angels, spirits, and ministers, are they the same thing or are they different?
No,
Like,
they
could ministers be some other form of messenger, like a prophet?
no. It's here. It's rather a parallelism of usual biblical parallelism.
Oh,
They
okay.
more or less same,
Okay.
as far as we can say. Yeah. Okay. Next section. So now, after God has established the foundations of the earth, has manifested Himself as the creative power, He goes down to work on the fabric of the world, so to speak. He's creating, taming chaos and upholding the creation. So God who establishes the earth on her sure foundation, it shall not be moved forever. The deep can be also translated the abyss, as it were a garment is his covering. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they shall flee. At the voice of your thunder they shall be hasted away. They go up to the mountains and down to the plains, to the place which you have founded for them. You have set a bound which they shall not pass, neither they shall turn again to cover the earth. Well, if you read this carefully later, because I understand it requires deeper reflection, you will see here generally the description of God taming this original waters of chaos, because they are first what he does, he establishes the earth on a sure foundation, unshakable foundation, and then he deals with these waters that are ranging around and can still flood the earth. So at first, the earth was closed, covered with waters. So the deep, the abyss of waters was covering the face of the earth to such an extent that water stood above the mountains. There was more water covering the whole earthly world. That's exactly what we have in the first Genesis. Then God separates the dry land from, first separates the waters of the earth from the waters of heaven by this firmament, by this heavenly vault, and then separates the dry land from the water, from the sea or ocean. And it's represented here as God's kind of cry, rebuke to the waters, like, hush, flee away. And they flee. And then again, the natural phenomenon of thunder is represented as a kind of symbol of God's voice. So as God's voice is as powerful as this thunder that we hear in the storm, something that for an ancient person was really fearful and dreadful natural phenomenon. And as the consequence of this powerful voice of God, the waters that were covering the earth flee and are contained to their places. So they go down from the mountains down to the plains, and all the way down to the shallow places in the earth, like seas, oceans, lakes, where they are bound, where they are contained. And this word bound is meaningful because it's a strong word. It's again this idea of taming a power that is hard to contain, but by the creative power of God, it's limited, closed down to a certain place from where it doesn't threaten any longer living creatures. So the waters are bound and they shall not pass their limits. They will not return again to cover the earth. And you can hear in this place not only resonances of biblical story of creation, but also this dreadful story of the flood, because what the flood was, again symbolically, is losing these waters free, setting them free to cover the world again, to destroy life. So this promise not to that waters will not cover the earth again is very, very strong, very loaded with meaning in the light of the story of the flood. And then in verses 10 to 18, God is represented as someone who is actually nourishing the creation, giving food, giving life to everything. It starts with the claim that God sends forth his fountains among the valleys. The waters shall run between the mountains. They shall give drink to all the wild beasts of the field. The wild asses shall take of them to quench their thirst. Wild asses are just a symbol of an animal in the Near East that was impossible to domesticate. It's like a very unruly, very wild creature, and God is represented to taking care not only of humans and domesticated cattle, but those crazy wild asses that are not possible to contain by any human power. And then the birds of the sky. By the streams of waters shall the birds of the sky lodge. They shall utter a voice out of the midst of the rocks. So everything crawls with life. Valleys, fields, forests, and even the rocks, the dry desert landscape. He waters the mountains from his chambers, so meaning that waters the mountains by rain coming down from the sky. The earth shall be satisfied with the fruit of your works. He makes grass to grow for the cattle, the green herb for the service of man, to bring bread out of the earth. And wine makes glad the heart of man, to make his face cheerful with oil, and bread strengthens man's heart. The trees of the plain shall be full of sap, even the cedars of Lebanon which he has planted. There the sparrows will build their nests, and the house of the heron takes the lead among them. The high mountains are a refuge for the stags, and the rock for the rabbits. So this is just like a very rich description of nature, where everything lives, everything is satisfied, everything is filled with life, joy, food, well-being, full of sap, bird nesting, and people rejoicing from the gifts of oil, bread, and wine, the three components of staple food in the Near East of that time. And then the psalm comes to kind of climax point that would mirror this reality of the day 6 in the first chapter of Genesis. So it says like this: He appointed the moon for seasons, the sun knows his going down. You did make darkness, and it was night. In it, all the wild beasts of the forest will be abroad, even young lions roaring for prey, and to seek meat for themselves from God. The sun arises, and they shall be gathered together, and shall lie down in their dens. Man shall go forth to his work, and to his labor till evening. So it starts with this kind of astronomical claim that God has set the luminaries in heaven, in the sky, sun and moon, to mark the natural seasons and the hours of day and night. Again, this is something that comes from Genesis 1. And God has created darkness and night, and then morning and light as natural phenomena. Here, darkness and night don't have this kind of sinister, evil character, because sometimes night and darkness is used explicitly as a metaphor of evil and sin, or at least a danger. Here it's not. It's just a part of natural setting of the created world. And the same way, the wild beasts of the forest, they are represented here as good forces, not anything dangerous to humans, but as God's creatures in their own right. They are loved by God. They are roaring to God for prey. They are receiving their food, their meat from God. So they are legitimate citizens of the created world. And then we turn to the creation of human being, although no creation is mentioned here, but the whole imagery, the sun rises and the beasts hide away in their dens. The night is their natural habitat. But when the sun rises, the new day starts, the new creature appears, a human being, man shall go forth to his work. So it's not only, not simply a man emerges out of his bedroom, but man goes forth to do something useful, to labor till evening. So again, it's a reference to Genesis, to the second chapter, where Adam is created and is entrusted the Garden of Eden, and is given a commandment to cultivate, to take care of the land and take care of the plants, and to actually work over the creation. So the creation of God is perfect, is harmonious, is beautiful, but still a human being is placed in the center of creation to take care of that creation and to work on it further. Not to undo or outdo what God has done, but to continue the creative work of God. I think it's a beautiful insight here. And then this panorama spreads even further to representing other realms of creation still inhabited with God's presence. So it starts with this cry of admiration. How great are your works, O Lord! In wisdom you have wrought them all. The earth is filled with thy creation. And then, look, here is the great and wide sea. There are things creeping innumerable, small animals and great. There go the ships. And this dragon, in the original, it's called by name Leviathan. It's again, a mythical creature that in all Near Eastern mythologies is represented as terrible, as a kind of demonic power that resists God. But look how it's turned here. this dragon whom you have made to play in it, or in some translations, to be played with. So this dragon, in a similar way as lions are represented as innocent and harmless in God's kingdom, um, the same way, even this dragon is represented as someone playing in the water, or being played with by God or by human beings. And all they wait to give for you to give them food in due time. When you have given it to them, they will gather it. And when you have opened your hand, they shall be filled with good. So they are all dependent, all this huge variety of created beings, they are all dependent on God's goodness, on God's benevolence, on God providing them food, which they will just gather. But when you have turned away your face, they shall be troubled. You will take away their breath, and they shall fail and return to their dust. So take away their breath refers again to the second chapter of Genesis, in which God is breathing his spirit into Adam's nostrils and makes him alive, makes him alive not only physiologically, but with divine presence, divine spirit, and image of God. And here, this idea of God breathing into creation his spirit and his life is also represented. And when this breath of God or spirit of God is taken away from them, they simply die. They returned into the soil, into the dust from which they were taken, from which they have been taken. They shall you shall send forth your spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. So the idea here is that God can take the breath, and then life stops. And if God resumes his benevolence towards the creation and breatheth his spirit again, they will be recreated, they will return to life, and the face of the earth, so the whole ecosystem of the earth, will be renewed and brought back to life. And then, of course, the psalm ends with even stronger praise, the praise that went throughout the whole composition, but reaches its climax, its summit at the end. Let the glory of the Lord be forever. The Lord shall rejoice in his works, who looks upon the earth and makes it tremble, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord while I live, or as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God as long as I exist. Let my meditation be sweet to him, and I will rejoice in the Lord. Let the sinners fail from off the earth, and transgressors, so that they shall be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. So here is this idea of God rejoicing in his work. I think it's also a very powerful and very beautiful idea, because very often in later philosophical systems, God is represented as a kind of remote God that has, this idea, Aristotelian, and then later philosophical idea of God as first mover, someone who kind of made the first spark of creation, and after that, the creation, the created world developed on its own. And God doesn't care about creation. God is not present in it. God is just kind of set in motion a mechanism that functions autonomously from him. And that's absolutely non-biblical. And that's what this psalm is so beautifully conveying, that Lord is present in every move of creation, in every blow of the wind, in every drop of the ocean, in every movement of a fish or bird in the sky. Everything is testifying about God, about his wisdom and his beauty. And God is actually rejoicing. It's actually like dancing this dance with the creation. He's deeply involved into creation. He's not a cold, abstract first principle. He's someone who is playing with the whales and with dragon of the sea and with the birds and feeding lions and just happily enjoying the happiness of creation. That's the idea. And then the same idea is mirrored here in the 34, that after meditating on this creation of the world, on this beautiful picture of creation, I will rejoice in the Lord. Lord rejoices in the creation, and I will rejoice in the Lord. I will join this choir, this dance of creation in which God takes the lead, and I will become the part of that festival. Yeah, God is represented as touching the mountains, and they smoke, volcanoes, and so on. Marta?
This is like the summit of praise, as you titled it. Now, is that the end of this, according to the Greek translation? Because my translation has the word hallelujah at the very end, hallelujah. And
Yeah,
it says, yeah, to add to the summit of praise, it says here a frequent word used in the last third of the Psalter. The word combines the plural imperative of praise, hallelujah, with an abbreviated form of the divine name Yahweh, hallelujah. That's interesting. I thought that this one doesn't have it.
Well, it's in some editions, it has this word Alleluia, in some not. Some commentators would say that it doesn't belong to the original composition of the psalm. Some actually say that the whole verse 35 does not belong to the original composition, but I will comment on that in a minute. But anyway, it's a praise. Even if the psalm ends with just bless the Lord, oh my soul, it's still a powerful statement. And then Alleluia could have been added as just a liturgical exclamation, as the psalm was used in the liturgy.
Right.
Also, this very ecstatic claim that I will sing to the Lord. I don't know why they are translating here this while. It has to be as long as I live. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God as long as I exist. So the idea is that as long as I breathe and I am, I will, my very being blesses and glorifies the Lord, because I participate in this carnival of creation. Yeah, and as I said, verse 35 has a bit unusual flavor in this composition, and that's why some people think it was added a bit later. It's still ancient and biblical, but maybe not original, because all of a sudden it turns to sinners and transgressors, so that let them disappear from the face of the earth. And well, that might actually fall into the logic of this psalm, because if God's creation is harmonious and perfect, that means some people who rebel or transgress or do evil things simply do not fit into the picture. They do not belong into this harmonious and beautiful whole. And that might have led the psalmist to this kind of claim of exclusion, saying that let them not spoil this beautiful panorama. And so, bless the Lord of my soul. That's the end of our course. That's a good ending, I think.
There's a comment I want to make.
Yeah.
We notice that in the whole psalm, man is not singled out in any way. He's just part of the creation. He's not elevated or anything. And I think that kind of humbles us to know that we are just part, of this creation. We're nothing special,
Yeah. Thank you. That's a beautiful addition. It's actually a very ecological psalm. It's if you read it in this spirit, it recalls something of this beautiful fantasy books by Tolkien or C.S. Lewis, when all living creatures are represented as equal, different but animated and kind of brothers and sisters. It's a very profoundly environmental psalm, I would say.
Right.
Okay, any other comments?
A question?
Greg, yeah, please.
Yes, the in the Byzantine liturgy, like I say at Vespers, or at the end they repeat, "The sun knows the time of its setting. You bring forth the sin of its darkness and its night. How great are your works, O Lord, and you have wrought them all." So is that just liturgically put in because it's used
it's just a refrain, so for the sake of composition, but the psalm actually ends here, and then they decided to add couple verses taken from before at the end, just to repeat. That happens pretty often when we sing psalms in the liturgy. Like the brightest verses were kind of picked up and then resumed at the end again. What they considered to be the most powerful phrases of the psalm or something like that.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
I could just imagine this whole psalm to be put to music like a symphony, and different instruments playing different creatures, It could be put to a symphony. It would be a beautiful work. I don't know, maybe there is something like that.
I will send you some musical material. I have collected a lot on psalms, and I will send you some. I'm not sure it has what you just described, but at least it has some very good musical pieces on different psalms, and I will send you in the email. And yeah, let me thank you for participation in this course, for your patience and with my stumbling English and all that. But I also enjoyed working with you, and as I said, I will send out this email with this suggestion of further continuation of the course. And I would be happy to do that in any case. If people support me, or if people do not support me, I will probably still do it. Yeah, that's my plan to continue somehow.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And
Thank
it was
you,
a pleasure
so much.
to talk to you, and keep in touch.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
Have a good rest. Sweet night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. God bless.
Superb.
Likewise.